In my experience, having been in the Pokemon community for many years, I found that people in the community are pretty split on hacking Pokemon. And when I mean hacking Pokemon, I'm not necessarily referring to giving Pokemon moves they don't have access to or making their base stats crazy powerful. I think most people agree that if you want to do that on your own time, that's fine. But bringing that to a tournament obviously would be illegal. That's not something that many people are going to be able to get behind. But more just generally speaking, being able to hack in Pokemon that would normally be legal, I think this is one that people are more opposed to. For example, if you go on Wi-Fi and you see somebody with a full team of shiny Pokemon, a knee-jerk reaction might be, oh, well, he just hacked those in, clearly. And it's sort of sad because that isn't necessarily the case. There are some people who do spend the many hours that it takes to get those shiny Pokemon. And especially in Gen 8 with the addition of the marks, the rarity of certain combinations of marks and shiny and other things like that has actually increased the rarity of certain Pokemon. And if you wanted to put in the effort to get that, it actually would almost hurt you in the end, because people would just dismiss that as saying, oh, well, they must have hacked that specific combination in because it's so hard to get. So there's no point really getting that because people aren't even going to appreciate the amount of time that you put into it. But of course, some people still do like to shiny hunt and they like to go for those really rare marks. And I can get behind that. I think it's fine to spend your time that way if that's what you want to do. But overall, I guess the main point is that the community is split on whether hacking should be acceptable, or at least in what contexts hacking should be acceptable and in which they should not. But the community is only one half of this equation. The other half of the equation, of course, is the company itself. And I'm going to use the names of the company interchangeably. I understand that Game Freak and the Pokemon Company and even Monsters, those are all separate branches and they aren't necessarily the same company. But when we say the Pokemon Company or Game Freak, we just generally mean the entity controlling how we get to experience Pokemon as a game or as a franchise with all the merchandise and the card game and whatever other ways you can enjoy it. And so I understand those are different, but I'll use Game Freak and the Pokemon Company interchangeably because I think both of them probably to some extent bear some fault here. So the company being the other half of the equation, my point in today's video is to argue that the Pokemon Company or Game Freak, they want you, the consumer, to view individual Pokemon as real companions or friends, or at the very least they want you to view them as a valuable or unique commodity. What I mean by that is that they don't want you to view a Pokemon as a collection of code stored on a SD card in your Switch or stored on the cloud somewhere. Because I could view a completed save file of a game as nothing more than just bits and bytes. And in most other games, that is all it is. But there are some games that want to be more than that. And Pokemon is definitely one of them, where they want you to view the Pokemon stored in your card as actually existing and having value intrinsic unto themselves. So where does this come into play? And how can I argue, first of all, that this is something that they want? And even if this were something that they would want, why would they want it? And how does that affect how our experience is being colored when it comes to Pokemon as a game or as a franchise? And so that's what I want to talk about in today's video. The first thing I want to do is I want to coin a term. Now, I'm not a social engineer or a scientist in that context, at least. And I don't want to, if you're an actual, somebody who's, an anthropologist, if you're somebody who studies social relationships and social behavior, then, don't come after me for reappropriating a term. But I want to coin this term that I'm going to call para-anthropomorphic relationships. So it's like parasocial relationships, right? You can obviously see where we're going with here. A parasocial relationship is when you have a famous person, especially somebody who spent a lot of time online, like a YouTuber, and they are always talking about their lives. They're always posting about it on social media, and their followers get to know them so well through those interactions that they feel like they are friends with this YouTuber or this famous person, like they are intimately related to them somehow because they know so much about them. But the problem is that that's a one-way street, and the YouTuber doesn't know jack about their followers because it's an amalgamation of hundreds of thousands or millions of people, each with their own individual lives, and they know nothing about almost all of them. And so it's not really a relationship, and people can get fixated on this relationship, and it's not really a healthy relationship to try to maintain. So I want to take that concept and turn it towards Pokemon. And so I have this para-anthropomorphic relationship. And what that means is that Pokemon themselves don't exist. This is a fantasy world. And obviously Pikachu is not something you can catch in your backyard with a Pokeball. So none of that exists. And there's nothing wrong with indulging in fantasy whatsoever. I love having make-believe time. I think it's healthy for adults and, of course, for children, and I wholeheartedly support that. But at some point, you have to acknowledge that this isn't actually something that is real or that exists. And if I were to have a relationship with this figment of my imagination, I think most people would view that as being unhealthy. And of course, this can extend to other areas like anime and whatever. But specifically Pokemon, they aren't even technically humans. So I'm going to use anthropomorphization, that term, and say that I'm going to turn this Pikachu into something with which I can have a relationship when it's nothing but a pile of code. And I think that's where we sort of veer off into dangerous territory. But Game Freak wants to encourage that kind of behavior in its consumers, because if it can do that, then you're more likely to be more invested in the franchise. So this is a very bold claim for me to make, because it makes it sound like Game Freak or the Pokemon Company, they want their consumer base to be engaging in an unhealthy behavior, and that almost sounds like libel. So I want to back this up with a few real points and show how the company has a vested interest in making this happen. And of course, this is all speculation on my part, and I can't actually prove anything, so please don't sue me. Great. So with that out of the way, let's get into the reasons that I have for making this claim. The first one I will say is the most obvious. Merchandising. So Game Freak makes the games, but of course the Pokemon Company makes everything else. I don't know about the cards, but at least for the plushies and the anime and other things like that, that's all going to be handled, I believe, by that company. And if it's not, it's all the same. So you can figure that out, but it's basically that umbrella I want to talk about. And if I can get you to be really interested in the evolutions, and anytime I put out a new evolution line of dinnerware on the Pokemon Center website, you're going to be more likely to buy that as a result. So I want to make really marketable Pokemon that people are going to grow attached to and think fondly of, right? And this isn't something that's unique to just Pokemon. This is something that, of course, exists in all video game and media franchises, right? Nobody's saying that I'm forming this weird relationship with Darth Vader, and yet Star Wars and Disney is going to do their best to sell Darth Vader to me as a concept. That way I'll buy all of the related merchandise associated with Darth Vader. So by no means is this something that's unique to Pokemon. But Pokemon has the added benefit of being able to say, go on an adventure with this Pokemon, form a bond with this Pokemon, and you do see this in so much of the marketing. Maybe I'll be able to find some to put up on the screen, or maybe I won't. Who knows? A lot of it's done in audio. But this idea of have an adventure with your Pokemon. It's your Pokemon. And it is different from watching a movie or reading a book. because in those, you're just experiencing a world. In Pokemon, you're specifically encouraged to invest yourself and self-insert yourself into the world and make direct relationships with those characters. And then they can sell you the merchandise as a result. So if they can make a cool Pokemon that you're going to want to have on your team and then go on an adventure with it, maybe at the end of that, you'll be a lot more inclined to buy a plushie of it so that you can have your whole team sitting in the room by your bedside or something to that effect, right? And so they're going to make special care that their starters are merchandisable. They're going to make special care that a lot of the more cool legendaries are merchandisable because they want people to say, hey, I bought the game because this Pokemon really spoke to me, and then I can go and have an adventure with this Pokemon specifically. And of course, they have their evolutions, which are quite popular among others. And that's why they have taken Eevee from being a really rare Pokemon that's you only get like maybe one of in the entire game, and it's sort of hard to get your hands on it, into something that they hand out super easily because they want people to be able to get an Eevee so that they can get whatever evolution they're particularly fond of. And then, of course, that's good for the marketing. So that one's sort of low-hanging fruit. And it isn't really a smoking gun, I don't think. But let's get to some of these other points, and then maybe you'll see things my way. So the second point is another sort of easy one, but it's one that I think should have been gone a long time ago. And that's version exclusives. So ever since Generation 1, Red and Blue came out, and they had different Pokemon in Red as opposed to Blue. Now, almost all the Pokemon you can get in both versions, but you can't get certain Pokemon like Vulpix or Growlithe or whatever in one version or another. And that makes it so that you may have to trade with your friends. And at the time, it sort of makes sense because that says, hey, you only need to buy one version. We want you to only buy one version and then trade with your friend to get the Pokemon you don't need.
You can't catch all 150 Pokemon by yourself.
So close.
You need a friend to trade with.
But as time went on, this sort of got corrupted a bit. First of all, they started making the Legendaries version exclusive, and I think this is a big problem. So in Generation 1, the Legendaries weren't exclusive. Mewtwo was in all the games. The Legendary Birds were in all the games. And so you could get those one-off Pokemon, Snorlax, I suppose, technically speaking. You could get all of those in your game, no problem. The only one you couldn't do would be the starters. But that was something that everybody had as a problem, and there was no fixing that. Even if you had a friend, you still couldn't get a Venusaur, and you didn't have breeding in that game, of course. So that was just a general issue for everybody involved. But everything else you could get in your game that was a one-off, and then you could trade over 100 Ponytas for all I care, because those are a dime a dozen in my game. And so it makes the trading a lot easier, a lot more simple. But in Gen 2, there's only one Lugia, there's only one Ho-Oh, and as soon as I trade that over, well, now I don't have that in my game. So it's not really something that's tradable as such. Of course, Gen 2 fixed the other problem of making Pokemon breedable, so now you can give a bunch of Chikoritas to your friend. So nowadays, of course, we have breeding and we have all of that, so that's not a problem. But we still have Lunala and Solgaleo in different games, and you only get one of them. Technically, you get two with Cosmog, and if they were to do that, I wouldn't have as much of a problem, right? If you want to give me both Pokemon in the same game, then that's fine. But unless they're going to give me Koraidon and Miraidon in the same game, which they did not do in Sword and Shield, then it really hinders your gameplay experience, because you're going to be going on to play competitive Pokemon. You want to play in the Ubers tier, or maybe they allow restricted Pokemon in at some point. Unless you have a friend who's willing to just straight up part with their Legendary, you don't have that Pokemon in your decks. Sorry about that, but that's just how it is. So that means if you really want to get in and be fully invested, you're going to have to buy both games. And this is an artificial barrier that doesn't need to exist. The only reason it exists is because they want people to have to spend double the amount of money to get everything by themselves. Because even if you had a friend, your friend isn't going to be like, oh, my Zacian, yeah, I'm not using that, you can just have it. Nobody's going to do that to Zacian. You need that. So you're never going to have a complete dex unto yourself unless you either have your friend play through on a separate save file and then buy a second Nintendo Online subscription for that system account and trade it over to you in that way. Or you're going to have to just buy the game yourself and then trade it yourself to like Pokemon Home. So that's not really a great option. And I think that the version exclusive nonsense needed to have gone a long time ago. Is it cute that they come out with 2 different flavors of the game? Yeah. And technically speaking, if all the Pokemon were not version exclusives and everybody could get everything and they still made 2 versions, would I be mad about that? No. Because then I could just choose the flavor of the experience I wanted and I wouldn't be missing out on any functionality. But since the Pokemon themselves are part of the functionality experience, I think that you are missing something out when you have these version exclusives that are locked away from you and you have to have a second account or just that, like 5 or 10 Pokemon which you couldn't get otherwise, and mostly just the legendaries at this point. So if I didn't care about Pokemon, if I didn't care about having a relationship with fill in the blank Pokemon, then version exclusives wouldn't be as appealing to me. And so Game Freak's going to have a vested interest in making their version exclusives as marketable as possible, right? Make pseudo-legendaries version exclusive. Make Pokemon that people really like Scyther, version exclusive. Make some of the rare ones that have really cool designs. Make those version exclusives. Nobody cares about making Pidgey version exclusive because nobody cares about Pidgey. But if I can make the really cool ones that people really like and really care about, make those the version exclusives, then we got the issue. Now, remember what we were talking about at the beginning. We were saying that people don't like it when you hack Pokemon in. Well, if I can pull up PKHex and I can just create for myself all those version exclusive Pokemon that I don't need and just import them into the game, or somehow I can just change the random wild encounter code of that region, then that wouldn't change my competitive online experience. That wouldn't in any way, shape, or form affect how other people interacted with my game of Pokemon. All it would do is make it so that I have access to those version exclusives. And that's it. And why can't I do that? Well, now I have a hacked game. It's cheating somehow. But that only made the game more enjoyable for me, and it made it so that I could access all the content without having to pay $60 for a couple lines of code that were purposefully gated off from me. But as long as Game Freak can continue to convince people that somehow their virgin, untouched gameplay experience that they provide to us is the superior model despite having fewer features, well, then they've won. Okay. Number 3, the third point I want to talk about is that making it so that hacking Pokemon is considered taboo, or making it so that you view Pokemon more as an individual and less as a line of code, that increases the value of the game for the non-competitive players. So there are 3 kinds of players of Pokemon. There are the people that pick it up, play the game, maybe they finish it, maybe they don't, and then they put it aside and they never play a Pokemon until the next one comes out. And there are a lot of people who do that. When Pokemon Scarlet and Violet comes out, look on Twitch, see how many people are streaming the game. They're like, oh yeah, I haven't played Pokemon since Sword and Shield came out. I sort of remember a few things here and there, but overall it was an okay game. I just want to try this game out. Right? Though that's the first kind of player. I think that that's fine. I play lots of other franchise games in that way, where I'll play it when it comes out and I'll just put it aside and I won't pick it up until the next installment. There's nothing wrong with that. And the second group of people are the people that want to play the game, but they don't like competitive Pokemon. For a lot of people, competition is a stressful environment. They don't want to have to look at things in terms of winning and losing, either because they don't like losing or they don't like making other people lose. And so they would rather stay away from competitive, and they still love Pokemon. How do they interact with the game? Well, they're going to interact with it through catching all the Pokemon, shiny hunting, maybe getting ideal move sets, but they're never going to actually use them. And they can spend a lot of time breeding or catching curry mark Pokemon or however they want to do that. And that gives them added benefit or added content to the game. And then, of course, you have the third group of competitive players who just usually take the Pokemon Showdown, and we don't need to worry about those people. So the second group of people, I think, are the ones that Game Freak is really worried about. Because the first group don't really care if there's a compelling post-game. Right? If the Battle Frontier doesn't come back, that first group doesn't care. They probably don't even know the difference. And the third group has already gone off to Pokemon Showdown by this point. They don't matter either. There's the second group of people who says, okay, I beat the game, now what can I do with the game? And instead of having to worry about making a compelling post-game gameplay loop, all they need to do is say, hey, go do a bunch of raid dens where we can periodically put out a shiny version, and we will make them a pseudo method or chain fishing or SOS radar, whatever it happens to be. But all that entails is, here's a Pokemon that you could potentially find a rare version of, and go spend inordinate amount of time trying to roll the dice until you get that rare version. And that's it. And that will increase your gameplay time, and you'll feel like you're doing something, but really all you're doing is just rolling dice until you get a Yahtzee. And that's what you're calling a gameplay experience. It's not really that entertaining or compelling. And for some people, it isn't bad, but for the rest of us who wanted something a little more meaty, something maybe with a bit of story, something that would have had some amount of skill involved, this is basically devolved into a mobile game. But if Pokemon can convince people that this is an okay gameplay experience, then they don't have to invest time coming up with something better, because the player base is too busy grinding away trying to get their shiny antique Sinistea, that they don't have time to say, wait a second, I'm spending all this time, rolling dice trying to get a stupid antique Sinistea, and I am not actually doing anything meaningful with my time. Whereas somebody who hacked the game could literally go into PK Hex, click the button that says antique, click the button that says shiny, give it all the moves it needs for competitive, calls it a day, and it can give it level 100 and make it a poltergeist, right? So that would have taken about 10 seconds versus the hundreds of hours it would take to do it properly, quote unquote properly. So what did you really get out of that, other than some mindless chore that you had to do? And if you want that mindless chore, then more power to you. I like mindless stuff every once in a while too, but not all the time, and not when I want to use it for online activity or things like that, right? I want to be able to just go on and play online and not have to spend so much time getting that specific stuff. Okay, number 4 is events, and this is a big one in my mind. So Pokemon and Game Freak, they want to have their online, their distributors happy. They want to keep companies like GameStop and whatever they have in overseas countries, I don't know. They want to keep GameStop and those other companies happy, and they want to drive their customers to go into those stores, because then that keeps the distributors happy. The distributors need foot traffic in their stores to stay afloat. So how do they do this? They do it by having these distribution events, where I'm going to put out a shiny Eternatus, and the shiny Eternatus has never had the ability to have been acquired in the game before, because we shiny locked it. Why did we shiny lock it? So we could hold it back for an event, just like this one. So now we're 3 years down the road, or however long it's been, and I'm finally releasing it to you guys. Good thing we remembered this time. And we're going to send that out through GameStop. So you have to go down to your GameStop if you have one, and that's the only way you can get one. Now, it is nice that you have a guaranteed ability of getting it, so you don't have to waste your time re-rolling for it. That is good. I do like that. And this one is even coming with the right ability and moveset and everything. So it's like right out of the box, boom, it's done. But it might have been nice to have had that be just an online distribution, because then I wouldn't have had to have gone into the store. But the only reason you're doing that is because you need to keep GameStop happy. But what if, on the other hand, Pokemon doesn't have this culture of hacked Pokemon are bad, then everybody would have a Shiny Eternatus already. There's no reason not to have it, because you would just go into Pika Hex, and if you like Shiny Eternatus, you press the Shiny button, and you call it a day. That's all you need, right? And I understand not everybody has access to Pika Hex, but I'm imagining a world where hacking your Pokemon game isn't frowned upon by the Pokemon Company and by Nintendo, and you can just easily do this somehow. There are also other ways you can do it by like those Twitch streams that make the weird shiny dens, and maybe that doesn't apply specifically to Eternatus, but you get the idea. In a separate alternate reality, getting these shinies should not be difficult at all in a world where we just accept that Pokemon are lines of code and that having a relationship with them is really weird. So in this world, an event doesn't make any sense. Now, there are other events besides the shiny events. There are the events that give out specific moves. And those are, in a way, sort of interesting, because when the games first come out, Game Freak decides and declares basically these moves are legal on this Pokemon. All other moves are illegal, and that is the rule set that you must abide by. Now, that is pretty interesting, because what that says then is that you can't have Zurd with knockoff, and you can't have Tapu Lele with expanding force. In some ways, this nerfs Pokemon to the ground. In some ways, it makes certain Pokemon not broken, right? We're not giving Garchomp shift gear, for example. That would be ridiculous. So good. We have a certain rule set of what Pokemon can get, moves or not. And then every once in a while, an event comes out and gives a Pokemon access to a move it wouldn't normally have access to. Well, that just is, in a way, expanding the rule set. So that's not that bad, frankly. But then you still wouldn't need a distribution. You would just need Pokemon updating the rule set and saying, hey, now this Pokemon can have this move. And going forward, we can just have that move. Event distribution Pokemon are really problematic, actually. Now, on VGC, for instance, is not that big of a deal because you're not allowed to use Pokemon with moves from a previous generation. So you only have access to whatever has happened in the past couple years. So probably not that big of a deal. But otherwise, you do have a problem. For example, Victini. Victini has had access to Bolt Strike and Glaciate and V-Create. And V-Create, of course, is its signature move. But how many Victini come out with the move V-Create? One did recently. But that was the first one in many years. Like multiple years that America had access to. I don't know about Japan, because Japan gets cool stuff we never get over here. But the V-Create Victini is not a guaranteed thing. Many of them just come with Searing Shot and call it a day. So getting just a V-Create Victini legally within the past 10 years has been really difficult to do. And to say nothing of the Bolt Strike and Glaciate one, right? And of course, there's the infamous Wish Chansey. The amount of times the Wish Chansey has been used would have gone down to basically zero, because how many people have their Gen 3 cart from when they lived in New York City that one time and actually showed up to the event, right? That's not going to be that many people. So basically that would not be an allowable move if we actually had to if hacking weren't allowed, right? But if hacking were allowed and encouraged even, then we could just say, okay, whatever is legal in the legal approved move set, that is what we're allowed to use, and then we would call it a day. So by making it so that people view hacked Pokemon as taboo, and making it so that these lines of code have some inherent meaning to us as if they were actually a pet in real life, then that makes event distributions that much more valued to the player. Right? I get to go out and get a special version of this Pokemon, and then that can be my new friend, right? As opposed to just saying, yeah, and I could have hit Pika Hex and had that in 10 seconds. It doesn't really mean anything special. Pokemon also, on to the fifth point, has Pokemon Bank and Pokemon Home, and this is another interesting one, because Pokemon Bank and Pokemon Home cost money. Now, are Pokemon Bank or Home, are they providing a service? Yes, they are. This is cloud storage, and people should expect to pay for certain cloud storage, right? You have your Google Drive, and you don't usually pay for that, but basically most other things you do have to pay for within some amount. But I don't imagine that the amount of storage you're taking up to store your Pokemon in Pokemon Home is very much. So why am I paying however much it is a year? Well, it goes beyond just the storage. It also has the GTS, and it has the other trading functionalities. So it does have some service support, but the only reason we need any of that is because we're not allowed to hack our games. If I could hack my game, get whatever Pokemon I needed, like competitive, or whatever Pokemon I wanted to play games with, then I would have no need of previous versions or iterations of that Pokemon, right? But instead, what Game Freak does is they say, you played through Pokemon Emerald back when you were a 6-year-old, and you want to bring up that Sceptile with you into the newest games. And the only way you can do that is, of course, by bringing it up from Gen 3 to Gen 4, then Gen 4 to Gen 5, then to Gen 6, and then that's the first point at which you can get into Pokemon Bank. Once you get into Pokemon Bank, then you can transfer to Pokemon Home. And the only way to get a Pokemon Bank currently is to pay for it. Once the eShop is closed and whatever, then it'll become free. It should happen in the next year or so. But even then, you still have to pay for Pokemon Home. So that means if you want to be able to bring up these cherished Pokemon with whom you've made memories, and maybe you've even played through other games with these Pokemon, you have to basically pay them money for a service that wouldn't be necessary if we just accepted that the Pokemon didn't exist in real life and were just lines of code. But if they can continue this idea of this para-anthropomorphic relationship, then I will feel the desire as a lover of Pokemon to bring my old Pokemon up with me. And of course, I think this isn't necessarily fully nefarious on that part. I think that after Gen 2, the realization that they were going to have to leave all those Pokemon behind, and you couldn't transfer them through a time capsule of sorts because they changed all the back-end code, right? I think that the designers of Pokemon themselves were a little bit sad about that, and since then they've tried to make sure they don't upset anything too strongly so that you can always keep your old friends from previous games. So I don't think this is something that's necessarily cynically done, but they do materially benefit from this idea. And so I wouldn't take anybody who materially benefits from this at face value when they say, no, this isn't because we want you to pay for Pokemon Home specifically. It's just because I love Pokemon, you love Pokemon, we all love our Pokemon we've played the games through with, and you should be able to bring those up with you. I wouldn't take that at face value because they are materially benefiting from it directly. And it has come back to bite them, because when Dexit happened and you found out that you couldn't bring up your Sceptile into Sword and Shield until the home update, or whatever Pokemon, fill in the blank, Garchomp, whatever. Until that happened, people were really irritated, right? They were really mad. Like, this was one of the bigger problems that Game Freak has had. And at this point, I think people are going to have to just learn to live with it, because the Game Freak can't squeeze 1,000 Pokemon into every new installment of the game. That would be pretty demanding, and it's only going to get more demanding. So I understand the dilemma they've created for themselves, but they have created this dilemma for themselves, where they've tried to get people to really care about if this specific Pokemon is going to be in the game, because I've got my specific Pokemon from Gen 3, and I brought it up since then, and I better be able to play with that in this game too. Despite you having created 100 new Pokemon for me to play with and enjoy, I gotta have that one. So they've made their bed, now they have to sleep in it, but it has become a problem for them. Alright, I want to go into my last point because this video is getting sort of long. But my last point is that Game Freak wants to create this illusion or this idea of becoming a trainer in real life. So of course Pokemon don't exist in real life. As a result, Pokemon trainers and Pokemon breeders and all of that, none of that exists in real life. But people want to have this, imaginary dream of becoming the very best trainer or becoming a Pokemon breeder. Maybe there's some weird Pokemon rangers out there, I don't know. And so maintaining this facade, this illusion that Pokemon trainers are actually doing training in the games to make their Pokemon battle ready is something that we can actually see the Pokemon Company making a thing. So the biggest proof I have of this is in VGC, when you are talking about speed tiers and saying, oh, will Groudon outspeed the Kyogre, or vice versa. You say, oh, well, this trainer has trained their Pokemon to outspeed this Pokemon, right? Oh, this trainer they trained their Kyogre to outspeed the standard Groudon. They don't say they've EV'd it, and you could argue that that's just to make it easy to understand for the average consumer. But I think that you would still say they've set their speed to be faster, right? There's no reason to use the word train specifically, unless you want to maintain the illusion that Pokemon are something real and that you can invest time into it and not have it be a complete waste.
And there it is, a big superpower into that Kangaskhan, but the Intimidate really protecting it, as well as the potential training here. That Kangaskhan really eating that up.
Being a trainer in real life also sort of circles back around to my first point of merchandise, right? If I want to be a trainer in real life, I want to have the outfit, I want to have the plushies, get the little Pokeballs with the Pokemon figurines inside of them, so that I can go around and have that illusion. And as somebody who grew up with Pokemon, I can get behind having that kind of merchandise because I too liked to imagine that kind of stuff when I was a kid. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it still gets to the point of the matter that the Game Freak wants you to have these relationships so that they can sell more merchandise, so that they can have people have this idea in their head that me and Glaceon, we go way back. I love Glaceon so much, and I buy all the Glaceon merch as soon as it comes out because I'm the best Glaceon trainer there is. As opposed to just saying, I really like this character, which I think some people do, and I think that's a bit more healthy. But there are some others who take it a little bit too far, and I think it becomes a little bit unhealthy at that point. So at the end of the day, I personally don't hack my Pokemon in because I don't really know how, and I don't want to hack my Switch. But I do not think there's anything wrong with hacking Pokemon, specifically, hacking them to be normal and not something that you couldn't get out of normal gameplay. Because I think that the amount of time invested into hacking, or not into hacking, but into breeding properly and to getting the shiny and the other rare qualities you may want, isn't necessarily something that is worth the value proposition of having said shininess or having the other rare qualities. And there have been multiple videos that have come out recently that have been talking about, building a particular VGC team. If you wanted to build just one of those teams, how long would it take you to actually accomplish that? And those videos I watched, even a lot of those, use RNG manipulation and other things that other people might even consider cheating. If you were to do it without RNG manipulation, it would take you an unspecified amount of time. You couldn't actually figure out the amount of time it would take you to do it because it would be down to RNG. I'm going to roll dice. And maybe eventually it'll come up heads. Dice don't come up heads. But you're going to roll dice until you get a Yahtzee or whatever it is, because there is a certain percentage chance it'll happen, but it's vanishingly small, and you're just going to try to aim for that vanishingly small percent chance. And as soon as you get that and you take it online, somebody's going to call you a hacker, because there's no way you spend that much time looking for that one rare Pokemon, right? So that's my video for today. I don't know how well this is going to go, but I hope you guys understood sort of what I was trying to get at, and hopefully some of you guys agreed with what I had to say. Anyway, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys next time.